Hello and welcome back to another episode of App Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by Vitally. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Good morning, Federico. Afternoon
Hello.
or evening?
It's almost evening, I would say, for me.
Yeah, it's already afternoon here too. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you, John?
I'm doing well. I'm doing really well. How about yourself? Hanging in there?
I'm doing well. I was just I was messing around for MPC. I was playing around with Game Hub with my Red Magic 11 Pro phone, and I'm gonna talk about this on the show later this week. I tried to play Resident Evil Requiem.
That's what I was wondering because you sent me that video.
It's not gonna happen, man. It's Resident Evil on that phone. It's not gonna happen.
What are people doing with these videos? How do they do these things?
We'll have a conversation about this.
Okay.
I'm starting to not believe those videos on YouTube anymore. Look, I've tried everything. I don't know how these people are getting that image quality. Look, I don't think I'm stupid with these things, right? I think I know how to tweak, how to tinker around with things. I am just not getting that performance out of this gaming phone.
Don't they tell you the things to tweak in the videos too, like the parameters?
They do, and I keep the same things, and I do the same things, and my game looks like crap. so
yeah, I hear you. Oh, well.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about gaming. We have a separate show about that. It's called MPC, Next Portable Console, on Mac Stories and on Patreon if you want to get extra content. We're here to talk about something that is very frustrating for me and also I think for John.
Oh, yeah.
Which is making sense of all these new features and this new terminology for AI apps, especially on desktop. And we are specifically going to focus on Claude and ChatGPT today, or I guess Claude and Codex, which is OpenAI's separate system / application for programming and also kind of some agentic use cases.
Right.
This is very frustrating to us because not only are these things changing on a daily basis at this point, but these companies, Anthropic and OpenAI, they are adding feature on top of feature on top of feature, and they're breaking things in the process, and they are renaming things in the process. If you thought that Apple renaming the efficiency course to performance course was frustrating,
that's nothing.
That's nothing.
That's really nothing. No, I mean, obviously, I think the problem that we have here is that these companies are moving incredibly fast. And they're not I think traditional software development, you would kind of expect things to be pretty smooth by the time they're launched. There are always bugs. But what's happening here is, ChatGPT will come out with some feature in the chatbot. And so the Anthropic people will jump all over code and they'll release whatever they were working on that might be similar right away, whether it's really ready for prime time or not. And so you've had a lot of things like, a lot of things issued, released as previews or betas.
Research
previews, which is essentially an alpha, I would say, because when like Cowork first came out, and we'll talk about Cowork in a minute, Cowork was super rough when it first came out, but it got better very fast. I mean, it's only been in research preview for what, a month, 3 weeks, something like that. It's not been very long, but it's gotten a lot better. So yeah, that's kind of what's causing it, I think. But I feel like they need to pause for a moment and rethink all of these features, how they fit together, what they're called, what apps have them, what apps don't, and how the apps are designed even, because I've got some ideas for how the Claude app on the iPhone should look, for instance.
Yeah, let's start with that. Let's start with Claude and Anthropic. So I really spent some time over the past couple of days playing around with this. The easiest way to describe this is that Anthropic has stuffed Claude for Mac, with the 3 C's. That's what I'm calling them: chat, Cowork, and code. Yeah. So these are 3 separate modes that are now coexisting in the Claude app for Mac. I'm not talking about the website. I'm not talking about Claude Code in the terminal. I'm talking about Claude for Mac. Chat obviously used to be the default chatbot mode with Claude, where you can have your projects and you can have your MCP connectors. That's a separate conversation now. But now you have these 3 segments at the top of the screen. You can actually move between them by doing command 1, 2, and 3. I discovered.
That's nice.
You can move between chat, Cowork, and code. So chat, we don't need to talk about the chatbot. you know what Claude, the chatbot, is. Cowork and Code. This is where I think most people get confused. So Claude Code started as a terminal-only affair last year. In fact, it launched about a year ago. Then they added, if I'm not mistaken, Claude Code for Web, horribly named, but Claude Code for Web is Claude Code, but instead of working on your local computer in a folder, you point it to a GitHub repo and you work in that virtualized location. It creates a little virtual computer in the cloud, you point it to a repo and you say, work on this project for me.
Right.
Very different from Claude Code on your computer. Claude Code on your computer can now be accessed, and I'm going to give it to you, John, because you use Claude Code much more than I do. Yeah. You can use Claude Code the old-fashioned way with a terminal window.
Yes.
And that's the OG Claude Code. Or you can use desktop Claude Code inside Claude for Mac. You go to the code section of the Claude app, and there you can use Claude Code, which is kind of similar from a design perspective to Claude Code on the web, but it behaves more like Claude Code in the terminal, in that you can point it to a folder and you can work in a local folder and you don't need to use GitHub at all.
Although you can point it at GitHub.
Although you can.
Yeah.
But you can also point it to a folder.
Which is why all this gets confusing. It's like the focus is not on GitHub as much when you're in the app, although it's still possible to do it in the app. And of course, there's remote control, which allows you to work in the app, like one of the mobile apps I'm talking about specifically now, the iPhone or the iPad, and you're connecting back to a terminal session, which is not the same as Claude for Mac. It's something different.
So you wrote about remote control. Yeah. Remote control lets you remotely control a Claude Code session that is running in the terminal. Yes. Not inside the Claude app.
No, you have Claude actually running in the terminal already, and you type in a command.
This is already confusing.
You do remote dash control. It starts up a remote session, or you can make it the default so all your sessions are remote controllable, which is what I do.
Okay.
Because that way you don't have to be thinking about it in advance. Because otherwise you have to start your Claude session in remote control. So you go to the terminal, you're not in Claude yet, you type Claude space remote dash control, and now you've got a remote session. That's no good for my purposes because I never know in advance whether I'm going to be remotely controlling a session or not. So I just have it as the default. And then what you do is, what I would say the best thing to do is to rename your session, which is just a / rename and then give it a name. You can, a lot of times, all I'll do is I'll rename it for the computer that it's running on, like my Mac Studio, and then just use it for whatever comes up when I'm away from my desk. Or you can name it, for a project. If you're in the middle of a project and you have to leave your desk and you don't have the terminal available anymore, and then you can use it from one of those apps. And I wouldn't say I use it a lot, but I do use it. I mean, for instance, there was one night I was working on a project and I went off to bed. I had my iPad with me and something occurred to me. It was like, I should try to do this. And I had it in a remote session on my desktop computer.
So the session was already running on the computer.
Yes, it was already running, right? I had kind of quit for the day. I didn't exit out of Claude or anything. I just left the terminal window open for picking up where I left off for the next day. I went to bed. I thought, I should try this. I had this idea. I went into the iPad app. I went to the code section. I found my listed remote session, went into it. And once you open it up, you actually see what you would see in the terminal. I mean, it's formatted more like, for an iPad or iPhone app, but it's the same words are there. And you can just type commands straight into the remote session from the code tab. So I did a couple of things and, it was nice to be able to do that while it was still on my mind. I mean, the downside is, of course, is that this is not like the screen sharing because you don't have anything else available. So if you're working on an app, you could build the app, I guess, but you wouldn't be able to see the app or a web app or whatever you're working on. You've only got that insight into what's in the terminal. You don't have actually the other things on your computer, which is why I use this kind of sparingly because a lot of times if I'm on my laptop or something, or even on the iPad, using screen sharing on the Mac or something like Jump Desktop gives me access to the other things too. So I can take screenshots and feed those into Claude, other things that you might want to do beyond the terminal window itself.
So that's Claude and Claude Code.
Yeah.
There's a third.
Before we get to that, or maybe this isn't the time to raise this, but I want to talk about the difference between Cowork and projects, because I think that's confusing to a degree.
Okay. So projects are
How do you
basically
view them? Yeah.
So projects are folders for the chatbot. Projects are chats in the chatbot that have a common system prompt.
Yep.
That can use remote connectors, but don't have access to the file system.
Right. And they have their own memories. They have their own memory that are separate from each project and separate from chat. And you can attach documents for reference materials and things like that.
Yeah.
And so the way I think about these things, and they're related but different. I think of projects as long-term things, like the name suggests, a project where you're going to be coming back to it over and over, whether it's just a thing that's going to...
And you don't want to type the same prompt every single time.
Yeah, it's something that's going to take you a long time to complete, or you're going to ask similar things and want a similar prompt over and over again to do that. So I have a bunch of projects, whereas Cowork is more of like a one-off thing where you're...
Kind of. So
see, that's where it gets confusing sometimes to decide which to use.
So I think Cowork is the most confusing of the bunch so far, also because it's the latest one and it's labeled as a research preview and it's desktop only. So Cowork has no mobile presence at all. Cowork, the technical description is that they took the agentic guts of Claude Code, the way that Claude Code responds to you, calls external tools, comes back, compacts the conversation, continues. They took that thing that John loves to call the agentic harness of Claude Code.
My favorite word.
And they turned it into something for more general productivity. That's what Cowork is. But there's a difference. So Cowork, it doesn't organize your chats in projects. You can choose to work. You can choose to start a Cowork session in a folder on your Mac or not.
Which is a little bit like how Claude Code works, right? I mean, because you're doing it inside some sort of project folder, typically.
If you work in a folder, and if that folder contains a Claude.md instruction file, it will read that.
Yeah.
Even if your Claude.md is symlinked to an agents.md, because OpenAI and Anthropic cannot agree upon a naming standard for these instruction documents, it will read the symlinked document.
Right.
Okay? So you can basically pre-inject some system instructions into Claude Cowork. For example, in my Markdown document that I have in my agent folder, there are some preset instructions that say, I'm Federico Vitici, I use Todoist, I use Notion, this is the Notion database where I keep my daily notes, like basically preset information for Claude Cowork to get started, so that it doesn't have to search for my daily notes every time, for example.
Right.
The thing about Cowork that I really like is that it behaves like Claude Code, but presents you information like regular Claude.
Right.
So it's got that sort of sequential tool calling nature without showing you that it's running terminal commands, without showing you that it's doing like programmery things. Right. And that's sort of the pitch for Cowork, right? It's an agent, it's a general purpose agent, and they have done this because people were using Claude Code, which is meant for developers and programmers, for general productivity, which is not designed for.
Well, so, because there are bash commands to move files around your computer, and there are scripts being written in the background to maybe export Markdown as a PDF using Pandoc, and there's all kinds of things that can be done. Yeah.
So I am going to, I think I mentioned all the things. There's 3 more things I need to explain.
Okay.
First is a series of complaints. Then there's a series of things that Anthropic are doing right. And third is a final feature that I want to mention. So the complaints is, I call this section in our document, John, the great fragmentation of tools.
Yep.
There are too many words, Anthropic. There are too many terms that you're asking people to learn and keep up to date with.
Yeah.
Just to go in succession here, John. Skills, connectors, MCP, plugins, hooks, /commands, agents. So
I would add artifacts to that.
And artifacts.
That's not technically a tool, but...
So let's try and simplify this for our listeners.
Yeah.
Skills are those skill.md. They're markdown documents that basically teach Claude how to do something. They're packaged instructions. They're basically prompts as markdown files.
And they can be combined with a script, for instance.
They can contain scripts. They can contain image assets. They can contain whatever you want as long as you store them in a folder. Connectors and MCP, they're basically the same thing now. Anthropic is trying to rebrand the MCP standard as the English word connector. They're the same thing. You are connecting to Todoist. It means you are using the Todoist MCP server.
And this is like a step in the right direction, I think, in the sense that people don't care if it's technically built on the MCP standard or whether it's like some one-off tool that Anthropic built for Notion or Gmail or something, because that's the difference, right? Is under the hood, some of these things may not be strictly MCP servers. They may have some additional code that's working on the Anthropic side.
/commands, I never use this, but these are basically ways to come up with your own text shortcuts, I think. Like you can create a /command where you type /JO and you have a /command for John that does, sends an email to John or something.
Yeah, I use a few of these. Certain
nice.
Yeah, for certain things that I've built where I want to like clean up a transcript or something. I have one that calls some scripts that's like called transcribe cleanup, and it will call some things and then
so they're basically abbreviations. Essentially.
Yeah, they're just easy to remember ways to kick off some sort of thing that you don't want to have happen automatically. It's like a manual process, basically. This episode of AppStories is brought to you by our friends at Vitally, the AI-powered workspace for customer success managers. Vitaly's purpose-built AI is for scaled customer success. It's there to help you better understand customers, to reduce churn, unlock growth, and always stay a step ahead. Basically all the things that make you great at your job. Vitally delivers the clarity, automation, and AI-driven insights your team needs, so you can move faster, stay aligned, and drive customer outcomes at scale. Vitally AI surfaces insights from every customer interaction to unlock another level of CS productivity, visibility, and collaboration. It's why Vitally is trusted by more than 600 leading B2B SaaS customer success teams. And how is this for a great offer? Vitally is offering a free pair of AirPods Pro for every AppStories listener who takes a qualified demo call. So if you're a customer success decision maker, schedule your call by visiting vitally.io/appstories. Again, that's vitally.io/appstories for a free pair of AirPods Pro when you take a qualified demo. Our thanks to Vitally for their support of AppStories.
Hooks. Have you ever used hooks?
Maybe once or twice, but not really.
Hooks. So if I'm not mistaken, hooks are so we're talking about Claude code here.
It's hooks into the guts of Claude itself.
They're basically triggers and events for things that can happen automatically when something happens in Claude code.
You know what I use them for, Ticci? I use them for notifications.
Makes sense.
I hooked up Simon Stovering's new beta app called Burr, BRRR, and I send myself notifications because you can do pretty rich notifications with that beta. And that uses a hook to different events that happen within Claude, such as like when something's pushed to GitHub, I get a notification that something has been pushed to GitHub. If Claude,
I don't have this beta, by the way.
I sent it to you over the weekend.
You did?
I did. I sent it to you on Saturday.
How many weekends ago?
No, just like last Saturday, I think. maybe Friday afternoon. But yeah, so I know when when things are pushed to GitHub, I get notifications when Claude needs my attention on my remote server, that kind of stuff.
What's it called again?
I'll say Burr, BRRR. Scroll up to Saturday. There aren't that many messages.
We exchange too many links. It's
yeah, we do. I'll resend it to you. You should check it out, though. It's very good. And he's building a CLI for it, too, even in the time since I installed it. So you can, which allows you to use it, I think, without necessarily using. There's advantages to the CLI versus hooks. I've got it installed with hooks.
Okay. The part that is most confusing to me is plugins, which I also think is, again, it's the latest thing that Anthropic has done, and it's the one that they have explained the least. So I pulled some links from the Claude documentation and the Claude Code documentation.
Yeah.
In Claude Code documentation, they say plugins extend Claude Code with skills, agents, hooks, and MCP servers. Plugin marketplaces are catalogs that help you discover and install these extensions without building them yourself.
It's a bundle is what it is.
It's a bundle of, so a plugin can contain an MCP server, some / commands for that MCP server, maybe some skills for that, and it's all prepackaged as a plugin.
And it's on a marketplace where presumably you can trust it more than if you just pull something off of a random GitHub repo.
The problem is that these plugins in the Claude app for Mac, they're very new. There is a gallery right now that only contains Anthropic plugins, no third-party plugins.
Superpower, I think, is in there now.
One.
That one I know of. That's the one that I put in our notes because I was just reading about it last night, and it is in there. I haven't installed it yet, but I read that it was in there.
I tried to install an Anthropic one.
Yeah.
So I've
done a few of them.
I clicked. There was one in the Anthropic web directory called Cloud Cowork Plugin Creator. Okay. So it was like a plugin to create plugins, very meta. I thought, this is interesting. And I clicked a link in my web browser, and he redirected me to Claude for Mac, and it said the plugin didn't exist. So
you can get at them easier, I think, through Claude Code. I haven't tried them on the Mac app. I've only tried them in Claude Code, where you can do things like get a code review plugin, for instance, which I think is made by Anthropic. They have a design one, I think.
There are too many words here.
There are too many words.
But the one thing that Anthropic, I think, are doing right now is they are unifying a lot of things. For example, something that I've noticed lately is that skills now sync all across your Claude apps.
Right.
If you upload a skill in the Claude website, it shows up in Claude for Mac on another computer. I just booted up my Mac Mini and I opened Claude on the Mac Mini, and it had all the same skills from Claude on the MacBook Pro. So they're now syncing all your skills with your Claude account. That's the right thing to do. They're also now properly syncing connectors. So anything that you connect to from Claude.ai or Claude for Mac will show up in every other instance of Claude. And not just that, but
I'm sorry. They seem to have stabilized too. For instance, like the Notion one and the Todoist one, which would get disconnected all the time, now seem to be, at least, and this is literally only over the last week or two that they've seemed to have stabilized.
Yes. And something that I've noticed a few days ago, and I told you, is now when you fire up Claude Code in the terminal, and you do the /command /MCP to see a list of your connectors, it'll show you all the existing connectors that are tied to your account that are coming from Claude.ai, which means you previously connected from either the Claude website or Claude for Mac. So you don't need to reset up all of those connectors in Claude Code for Terminal again. They all come, they all follow you around as long as you're using your account.
Right.
Finally, I want to talk about scheduled tasks.
Yeah, I want to hear about this because this is actually something I've been meaning to try and I haven't gotten around to it. And it's very, very new. It's like, like a week old or something.
Yeah, this is very new. Now, this lives in the sidebar of Claude for Mac, which I think you have some thoughts to share about the sidebar. it's a new entry there, and it's basically a way for you to schedule tasks that Claude Cowork will run for you, which means you can work in a folder, you can take all of your existing connectors, and you can schedule a task with a time and a prompt. So here's what I did, John. I took a previous project from the Claude chatbot. It was a very detailed prompt that told Claude how to process my email, look for important messages, and turn those important messages into deep linked Todoist tasks. I used to have to run that prompt manually every couple of days or every morning. I took that prompt, created a new scheduled task in Claude Cowork, running in the Claude app on my Mac Studio. Not on my MacBook Pro, not on my Mac Mini. I chose the Mac Studio because my Mac Studio is always on. And I can keep the Claude app open all the time.
Right.
Because that's one of the limitations of scheduled tasks.
Right.
They need the Claude app to be always running. Otherwise, they will not trigger.
That's why, like with the remote control, I'm doing the same thing on always on Macs because the terminal window has to be open. Let me ask you where this is because I don't see it.
Huh. Have you updated Claude for Mac?
I just did while you were talking because there's another complaint right there is that sometimes you realize after a while that you're out of date because you have to restart the app.
Try and go to Cowork, and you should see schedule.
Oh, it's under Cowork. I was under chat.
No, it's in Cowork.
I see. Okay, no, I got it. Yeah.
Your scheduled tasks don't sync across devices. So right now on my Mac Mini, I do not see the scheduled task that I created on the Mac Studio. Okay, so more fragmentation. However, I took that prompt, turned it into a scheduled task.
Yeah.
And it just worked.
I
did a first test. It successfully found my Gmail and Todoist connectors, ran a first pass of the prompt, and I can even tell you, scheduled tasks in Cowork can use your existing skills. Because as part of my prompt, I added one more step that said, every time you're finished processing my email and creating tasks in my Todoist, send me a notification with pushover using your pushover skill, which I personally created. And it did. So your Cowork scheduled tasks can use connectors, can use your file system, and can use your skills.
Oh, that's nice.
And they can be scheduled. So now, every day at 3:30 p.m., Claude Cowork running on my Mac Studio should be able to process my email for me.
All right. Well, so let me ask you I want to ask you, this is like an aside, what about your email processing? Give me an example of the kind of things you tell it to flow to the surface for you. Is it like people who I've responded to before and developers who are pitching apps and that, or somebody from with an apple.com email, that kind of thing?
I mean, you are answering yourself.
Okay. Those are just the things that I kind of already have set up in a way with like splits and Superhuman, right? But you're doing it all as one task and it becomes...
I do have my splits, but the thing is, if I don't create a task for me to nag me, I'm not going to...
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I'm terrible about email these days, and I want to set this up myself. So
yeah, Clap MacStories support requests, emails from Apple PR. It excludes things like newsletters, junk,
marketing emails of various
marketing
kinds.
emails. Yeah. It tries to look if that's a frequent contact, and obviously it only processes emails that I have not responded to. So
sure.
Emails where the last message, threads where the last message is not from me. That's the kind of thing that I do. So
okay, all right.
Overall, I would say Anthropic has obviously nailed the productivity space and the programmer space.
Yep, I agree.
They have too much going on in the Claude app.
Way too much, especially when you're on something like an iPhone.
I would at least spin off Claude Code into a separate application. See, I don't think they need to have 3 apps, right? I don't think there needs to be Claude Chat, Claude Cowork, and Claude Code.
Cowork and Code together, maybe?
That's what I was going to say. Maybe Cowork and Code together and just keep the chatbot.
Yeah.
I don't know, but 3 products into one application is too much. 3 separate applications is also probably too much.
Yep.
So maybe the middle ground is 2.
Yeah,
which, surprise, is what we're going to talk about with OpenAI.
Yeah, because the thing about Cowork and Claude Code is they're very similar in the way that they operate, and so I think they make sense together. And you could just do it as like a tab bar or some other kind of UI element to separate the two. The thing that drives me a little crazy about the Claude app is what you're saying is that the way this app works, especially on the iPhone, is that it's got a little menu button at the top that opens the sidebar. And this sidebar just goes on forever because it's chats, projects, artifacts, code, and then it's starred things, which can be both projects and chats, and recents. And to me, it feels like this. First of all, I think that this should be a tab bar app because right? Because it should be a tab bar that has chats. I think artifacts should be combined with something called documents. Just call them documents. And your documents are either reports you get in like Word or Excel or Markdown, and artifacts, which they're just web apps. They're like little mini web apps. So it's just HTML or React or whatever usually. So there should be a document section, a chat section, and a code section if you were to keep code in here. And then you have the search button, which they could use the new tab bar thing where search shrinks down to the far left, right? And then you would move the new chat thing up to the top, to the upper right. I'm just this is just like a really down and dirty design review here. Instead of like opening it up and you've just got this long list of chats, which, I don't know. It's too much. It's overwhelming.
It's too much. So, and I think we agree that one app is too confusing. 3, we probably don't want 3 apps.
No.
So maybe 2.
That said, I really like Claude. I mean, I'm a big fan of Claude, all of the apps actually. I mean, I find what we've just been talking about confusing and hard to keep up with. And I think it could be simplified a lot, but I like the product in general and most of these different features we've talked about.
Yeah. Now, OpenAI is doing things very differently, and I think I use ChatGPT and OpenAI a lot more than John.
Yes.
So, OpenAI, they also have the confusing thing where they have a bunch of things called Codex.
Yes, they do.
If I'm not mistaken, Codex started as a separate model. Then they did the Codex on the web, which was basically Claude Code, but by OpenAI. Then they did Codex CLI, which is Codex in the terminal.
And isn't Codex both open source and proprietary?
The Codex command line utility is open source.
Okay.
The whole thing is open source.
I see.
Codex for Mac, which is, and for Windows now, the Codex app is not open source.
Right.
But it's based on...
But it's using the open source tool.
It's using the open source hardness. And Codex is entirely open source. Now, I really like Codex. Yeah. I really do.
It's very good.
It's very good. I really like the new GPT 5.4 model. But it's a very different experience and it's a very different vibe from Claude. So first of all, I would urge everybody to use the Codex app instead of the terminal. I think OpenAI has done a pretty good job with the Codex app in the sense that it takes all of your pre-existing instructions or MCP connectors if you were using Codex in the terminal before, and it gives you a UI for everything.
Right.
That happens because the settings for the Codex app are based on the same settings files for the Codex CLI.
I see.
Everything lives in a hidden folder on your computer, .codex, where inside you will find a file called config.toml. That is a fancy JSON file that contains all of the settings for Codex. That same file can be configured both with Codex in the terminal and the Codex app. The Codex app is more intuitive because it gives you a UI to manage those settings. So that means that if you use Codex before, once again, this is totally separate from ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT as a website, ChatGPT as ChatGPT for Mac, which I think is a pretty good Mac app, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
They have adopted Liquid Glass. They have the feature called Work with Apps, which lets ChatGPT control some Mac apps like Notion and Apple Notes or TextEdit.
Right.
Codex is totally separate. And Codex is right now primarily for developers and programmers for doing things with code. In fact, when you open Codex and you point it to a folder, it says, let's build. It's
right.
designed for coding.
And if you are primarily on Claude like I am, I think one good way to get a sense for Codex is to take whatever you've been building in Claude and dump it into Codex and have it do a backstop review. That's one of the things that I do all the time with some of the web apps and things that I've been building is I just point it at the same folder and say, hey, I'm working on this thing. I want you to dispatch some agents and do a thorough review of the code and tell me what you think and come up with recommendations. And then you can either fix those things if it finds bugs or whatever right there in Codex, or you can take that output report, bring it back to Claude and say, hey, I had Codex do this. What do you think of these recommendations? And then you can play them off of each other and kind of come down. Because one of the things I think in a lot of code reviews that these chatbots all do, these LLMs all do, is that they will sometimes suggest things that are more theoretical problems than real problems. And so it can be useful to kind of see, all right, here's a list of things, and then play one chatbot off the other and see which ones are the ones that are actually real meaningful bugs that need to be fixed versus things that are just kind of either hallucinated or just minor issues.
That is an excellent point, also because Codex by nature loves to analyze and read a code base up front. It spends a lot of, even if you set the thinking level to low or medium, it spends by nature a lot of time reading and analyzing up front. And then it executes and it's fast. But it's a very different sort of hardness from Claude Code.
Yeah.
Claude Code usually just springs into action, sometimes to a fault.
Yes.
Codex loves to pre-think and pre-analyze everything. So very different behavior. Anyway, the Codex app, I mentioned, it picks up all of your existing MCP servers. If you were using Codex in the terminal before. If you were not, you can connect to MCP servers right in the Codex settings. They have some recommended connectors, things like Linear, Notion, but you can also connect to some custom MCP servers with the UI. And it's confusing. The UI for connecting to a custom MCP in Codex is too confusing. Like, there are like fields for like headers and token values. They tried to
reduce like I don't know.
They try to give a UI to the different types of MCP authentication that exist, like STDO and streamable HTTP.
Right.
But in the process, they made everything less intuitive than just doing what I did today, which is I Googled, how do I add the Todoist MCP to Codex? And I copied a terminal command, and I opened my terminal, and I connected.
Yeah.
So that part needs to be rethought a little.
Yeah.
They did a good job, I think, in Codex with the skills directory. They have a built-in visual gallery with some pre-baked examples of skills that you can add to Codex. And not just that, but Codex is also able to automatically read skills that you have in other agents folders, meaning it can read skills that you have in your Claude/skills folder on your computer. So they're doing that sort of like, oh, we see that you're using another agent. We can also sort of import your other skills for you. OpenAI, since Codex is open source, these curated skills that they make They're also open source. You can find them on GitHub. They have an OpenAI Codex skills repo that you can browse. Funnily enough, John, they used to make a skill for ChatGPT Atlas, the browser that they have semi-forgotten about. And they used to make a skill to control Atlas and to like fetch your Atlas tabs.
Yeah.
In a recent commit to the repo, that skill is gone. They have replaced the ChatGPT Atlas skill, which I still have on my computer because I didn't delete it, but they replaced it with the generic Playwright skill. Now, Playwright, if you're not familiar, is a virtualized Google Chrome MCP server thing that you can install to let a chatbot or an agent test web apps that you're building on its own.
Right.
So I don't know what OpenAI is doing with Atlas, but the pace
I wonder
of
if it just is because Atlas has been, Playwright's been around so long, it has probably a lot more features than what the Atlas one had.
Probably. You can, as of a few days ago, in Codex, enable fast mode. This is another fragmentation problem. Fast mode for Codex is not the same as, you may recall, Codex 5.3 Spark.
Oh, right.
They're not the same thing. Codex 5.3 Spark is a special, smaller, less capable model that OpenAI released on Cerebras, the fast inference provider that they entered an agreement with. Fast mode is a setting that is exclusive to the new GPT 5.4 model, parenthesis here. It's just called GPT 5.4. It's not called Codex 5.4.
Right,
so it seems that they are unifying the model names. They no longer have a separate Codex model, at least
I thought that
the
Codex models were optimized for Codex. And that
I also thought so.
Okay.
But then why did they launch everything and said, oh, GPT 5.4 is the new coding model also?
Yeah, I guess that's true. They did say that.
I don't know. Anyway, fast mode goes, if I'm not mistaken, speed is increased by 1.5x, but your credits are consumed at a 2x rate.
Great.
So you're going 50% faster, but you're spending twice as much.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. 100% more.
Yeah. So it didn't seem that much faster to me when I tried today. It's a little bit faster, but it's not Cerebras faster, you know.
Yeah. So you're mostly just burning tokens for no reason then, unless you're in a real hurry.
Unless you're in,
I suppose the accuracy is less too, though, isn't it? Too isn't fast
No. I don't think they are dumbing down the model when they're just asking you for more money. They're asking you for more usage.
Okay. All right.
But it's the same model. Because Spark is a completely different thing.
Yeah.
I would be curious to see if eventually we get a proper GPT 5.5 on Cerebras model.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to me that they would combine a dumbed down model, which would presumably be dumbed down to make it faster, with Cerebras instead of putting 5.4 on Cerebras and seeing what that chip can actually do. It must not have been enough for it to be.
I think since Cerebras, I guess Cerebras is a very small company. I don't think they have the resources right now because Cerebras, they're not like renting NVIDIA GPUs. They're actually making their own chips.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is that they
couldn't handle the load.
Yeah. Finally, I want to mention automations. Automations in Codex are kind of similar to schedule tasks in Claude, but they are more geared toward programmers. So they have a similar UI. You can create an automation in Codex for Mac to say every morning at 10 a.m. do a review of all my open PRs in this GitHub repo and give me a summary.
Yep.
The problem is that Codex, you can use it if you want as a general agent, but it's very slow. And the agentic loop inside of it has clearly not been designed for general productivity.
Right.
I tried today to connect my Notion and my Todoist MCP to Codex. And I tried asking, hey, can you give me a briefing of what's going on in my Notion daily notes and also what's going on in my task manager today? It took forever.
Really?
Like he spent 5 minutes thinking about it, even with a low thinking level.
Oh, wow.
And so that's because like Codex is designed for analyzing code bases, reviewing code, writing code. It's not designed to be a digital assistant, right? So I am not going to use automations in Codex because I am not a developer. I don't need to run code reviews every morning. I don't need to, check out my open PRs every morning or things like that. But if you are a developer, you can do that in the Codex app. And it's the only way, I think, to schedule something with Codex, with the Codex app.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's essentially Codex. The story with Codex right now is a lot less complicated than Anthropic and Claude because they are not doing personal productivity yet. That, I think, is the big missing item from the OpenAI offerings. They're doing a chatbot, which is insanely popular, and they're doing Codex.
It's interesting to me, though, when you think about that, too, because they're the one that's like angling to be the consumer model, whereas Anthropic is a little more business enterprisey in general, productivity oriented. You would think that tools like calendar and tasks and things would be a lot more important to OpenAI, that they'd be on top of that.
And this goes back to an old episode of AppStories. You know what's missing from all of this? The prosumer angle. Once again, we have one company that's catering to the enterprise on one side, and then we have OpenAI on the other that's just doing friendly consumer things. Where's the product for somebody like me or you? Right in the middle.
No, I've thought about this too. I've thought about this a lot.
Is it OpenClaw? But it's too confusing and it's not
definitely
intuitive.
Not OpenClaw right now. No.
Is it Perplexity Computer? Maybe. And we'll talk about maybe.
I think it's closer to. I think Claude's closer.
I think it's something in between Perplexity Computer and Cowork.
Yes.
But the big problem with these two, and maybe we'll talk about Perplexity Computer next time. The big problem for these two, there is no mobile version. Yeah. There is no mobile story. If I'm out and about and I want to do so, or if I just got in bed and I'm like, I forgot to do something, I cannot do it from my phone.
Well, that's why I was so happy when remote control came out, because it's not like I use it every day. But on the other hand, I'm not tied to my desk if I'm working on something in Claude Code in the terminal. So, I mean, I think as we wrap this up, Federico, I guess we should explain maybe which of these tools are the ones we're using the most. And I think for me, with Claude, it's the chat interface. I use that quite a bit, mostly for research type stuff. And the terminal, using Claude Code for building web apps and some native apps and other things like that. And then I'm using Codex to bounce some of my code off of Codex and then reintegrate it back with Claude Code when I'm finished. I think the piece that I haven't used a lot that I want to try out and use more is Cowork, because I've really enjoyed using Claude Code as a coding tool. And I think, there's a lot of potential for that to integrate well with productivity tasks. I just haven't spent a ton of time in it. I tend to use projects more, probably because I have a lot of recurring tasks that I have to do over and over, or I have long running tasks where I'm going to work on something for an hour or two today, and then I might not pick it up again for a couple of days. So it's nice to have a project for that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. How about you?
I mostly use ChatGPT and OpenClaw, which eventually we'll do an episode about OpenClaw, I guess. And I use Codex a lot. I don't use Claude Code. I mostly use Codex. I really like the nerdy, sort of like cold vibe of Codex, which is very different. Codex is
very different, yeah.
Codex is the cold, pragmatic nerd. Claude Code is the friendly, funny, approachable nerd. And I don't know, for some things I just prefer. I really like Codex. Yeah. Here's my problem. I mostly use ChatGPT and Codex, But I know in my heart that the tool that I want is Cowork. It just kills me that it's not on the iPhone. It kills me that
it'll get there. It'll
get there. I really, really like Claude Cowork, and I hope that they can make it faster, easier to access, easier to use. It's very early, but it's exactly the sort of thing where it's like, it's an LLM and a bunch of connectors, but it can also use your skills and it can schedule tasks. Like, that's the kind of tool that I want to use for work, but it's Mac only, and it,
Yeah, well, I mean, look, they brought code over to the iOS and the iPadOS app, and that is even less of a good fit, I think, with those platforms than Cowork is. So I'm sure Cowork will get there eventually. Like we said at the top, I mean, I think Cowork has been out for like a month at most. It's not been, it feels like forever ago in the AI world, but it really hasn't been that long.
Yeah. Boy, I'm sure there'll be some new words next week that we haven't covered here. So
we'll talk about the overhang and the harness again.
Oh my God. Yes, sure.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another episode of App Stories. And thank you to Vitally for supporting our efforts. And of course, you can find the two of us over at macstories.net and on social media, where Federico is at Fetici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHN VOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.